please join me in welcoming Roger Connors. Roger?
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to the webinar. Good to have everyone with us today. I thought I'd mention as we dive into this and get started that our work is comprehensive in that when we talk about accountability, we speak to all different aspects of how accountability manifests itself in the workplace culture. Each of our books is organized around a training track. So we have the self track, which you may be familiar with the book, The Oz Principle, that we're talking about here today, focuses on taking personal accountability. The culture track talks about how you build a culture of accountability within an organization so that people are thinking and acting in the manner necessary to achieve key organizational results. And finally, the others track talks about the other side of the coin, the other side of the accountability coin, which is one side is me taking accountability, the other side is myself holding others accountable in a positive, principled way that yields results and makes people feel good about it at the end of the day. So we deal with all these avenues and aspects of accountability to provide a comprehensive approach to building a culture of accountability where people are able to focus on key organizational results, get real traction, and accomplish what they need to. We also, and by the way, all of these books have been New York Times bestsellers and on the best-selling list. I think it validates the idea that accountability is an issue that organizations and leaders are dealing with today. We published last year a book called The Wisdom of Oz. And I wanted to mention this to you here today because it's an interesting connection to the Oz Principle. It's really the Oz Principle written for a general audience, so it's not a business book. It can be read in the context of a business situation, but the stories, the illustrations, the examples, the ideas, the writing style, all of it lends itself to a real fun, easy read. It's a real thin book. We found that people use that in almost every environment you can think of. So if particularly for your family or friends, this would be a great book in a non-business sense that if you wanted them to see it. This is also a great frontline book if you have a book that you want to hand out to the front line on accountability, on the Oz Principle, and want people able to actually get through it more quickly. This is a great book to consider using as well. Well, in this webinar today, our intention is to cover what we talk about in the training, the Oz Principle Accountability Training, and as we do that, we'll also cover the content of the book, The Oz Principle. We've got clients all over the world, thousands of clients in over 106 countries. Many of our clients are some of the top companies in the world that you can think of that we work with. And, of course, there's millions of people that have been trained using the principles and concepts I'm going to be talking to you about here today. You may recognize some of these client logos as just a quick sampling of some of those organizations. These are organizations that strategically are on the move. They're trying to accomplish some really important things. And in many cases, they have growth initiatives or they have cost initiatives. They're expanding in the marketplace. They're broadening their brand. They're doing strategic things that are allowing them, enabling them to have a wider reach. There's also organizations on the list that are struggling, that are trying to recapture market share and make things better. So we deal with all sorts and types of organizations. Usually our clients will use our training to focus on one of three areas. The first is increasing revenues and profitability. This could be top-line sales numbers. It could be EBITDA targets. It could be cost constraint measures, anything that has an impact on the P&L. Of course, reducing costs is an important area that clients use the training to optimize results. This could be Six Sigma types of initiatives. It could be initiatives that deal with cost reduction and budgets. And then finally, our clients use the training to support and successfully implement major enterprise-wide initiatives. They could be customer-oriented, customer satisfaction-oriented. It could be quality-oriented. It could be safety that we're focusing on. It could be the launch of new products or new product development. The list goes on. But what we find is that clients use the training to support important results that they're trying to accomplish today. Now, just at the outset, I should explain why we use the Oz metaphor with the Wizard of Oz. It's interesting. We were thinking about a way to talk about this concept that can be, a little heavy and feel consequential, accountability. I mean, when's the last time you heard someone ask who's accountable? It's probably when something's gone wrong. And that's one of the problems with how we use the notion and define the idea of accountability today in organizations and teams. we're going to change that a little bit in this webinar. But we wanted to find a fun, interesting way to kind of introduce the concept, and we just quickly, lightly tapped this metaphor of the Wizard of Oz. It's really a great little story when you think about the journey to greater accountability that happens in the story of the Wizard of Oz. I don't know if Frank Bond had that as his intended objective, but it had to be in there somewhere with the outcome that we see. Just think about it for a minute. You have these four characters who really, through no fault of their own, they all find themselves in circumstances that they can't control. Think about Dorothy. How did she get to the land of Oz? She was taken by a tornado, an act of God, and magically, mystically dropped into the land of Oz. She meets these other three characters, the Tin Man, who wasn't given a heart, the Scarecrow wasn't given a brain, and the Lion didn't have courage. And all of them feel victimized by the circumstances they're in. They don't see how what they have done has contributed to how they're feeling and what they're experiencing and the obstacles they're facing. So they get together, and you probably have seen the movie and not necessarily read the book. So I'm gonna lean into the movie side of this. In the movie, you see them all kind of gather together at the beginning of the movie, and they have a little bit of what we call a pity party, and they're all talking about how it's difficult it is and so forth. And then the idea comes up that there's someone who can solve all of their problems for them. And of course, that's the wizard who's in the city of the Emerald City. And so they take this journey down the Yellow Brick Road, and they go through several obstacles to get there, and they finally get to the Emerald City. And when they do, they find the wizard. Remember in the movie, little Toto, the dog, pulls the curtain back, and behind the curtain you see the wizard. And he's standing there, and he's just pulling levers and blowing smoke in this magical machine. And then the realization comes as he confesses that there's really nothing that he can do for them. There isn't a wizard who can solve all their problems for them, and they're disappointed. But they have one last quest, which did come from some prompting from the wizard, and that was to get the broomstick from the Wicked Witch of the West. And so they go on this last quest, and the Lion's showing great courage, and the Tin Man's showing great heart, and the Scarecrow's showing great strategy, great brains, and Dorothy realizes at the end of the story that all she had to do is click her heels 3 times and say, I want to go home. It's a story about the journey from a sense of powerlessness and sometimes even victimhood to a sense of being powerful and able to overcome obstacles and achieve the results you want to achieve. It's the story about the journey and the self-discovery of what it means to take accountability to get things done and to accomplish important tasks. And so we talk about that in the book a little bit in terms of the Wizard of Oz. It might be interesting for you to note that we've also conducted a workplace accountability study. This study was conducted over about 3 years. It says 2 years now, but it's now at the end of 3 years. And over 40,000 people responded, margin of errors in a 1% to 2% range, a scientific study on workplace accountability. This is being presented in a book that we'll be publishing on it's May 31st, called Fix It, Getting Accountability Right. 240 solutions for your most difficult business challenges. And I think you'll find that that would be an interesting read if you put that on your calendar to make sure you've noted that and have an opportunity to take advantage of that. Well, let me begin with the premise. Our premise here is that accountability begins by clearly defining the result. You can't create accountability within an organization, a team, or in your own life unless you're clear about what it is you're striving to achieve. Remember when I said accountability is usually discussed when something goes wrong? Well, that's the problem with accountability today. It feels consequential. It only seems to appear in the dialogue and discussion when things have gone wrong and people are searching and seeking for someone to blame. Well, there's another side of accountability. It's the positive, empowering side. It's a side where we take accountability, we decide, it's a decision, to take accountability and to be accountable for an outcome and to go make it happen. It's really a statement of saying I have an intention that I'm going to get this done, and then developing a sense of ownership around that intention to go make it happen. That's the kind of accountability we're talking about today. It's the kind of accountability that truly delivers in huge impact in terms of business results. Now, what I want to share with you here is that it's interesting as we go into organizations, because we'll ask the question about what are the results they're working to achieve. And what we find is that 90% of senior management teams fail in their ability to consistently identify in an aligned fashion the key results they're working to accomplish. Now, they all get kind of in the right ballpark, right? So they know there's revenue objectives, there's profitability objectives, there's strategic initiatives. But when you ask them to boil it down to the top 3 or 4 key results that need to be achieved this year, there is not consistent and alignment within organizations, management teams today. Now, why is that? Because there's so many things that have to get done. We worked with one senior management team that had 150, yeah, that's right, 150 corporate objectives that they needed to achieve. How can you focus? How can you concentrate? How can you create real accountability around 150 different things? We think there's real value in identifying the top key results, the top 3 or 4 things that you must achieve as an enterprise in order to be successful. Now, we've asked this in our workplace study, this question, and it's an interesting question. Are key results clearly defined and understood throughout your organization? 86% said no when it came to this clarity that we're talking about. Only 14% said yes. We asked the second question, do priorities change frequently, creating confusion around the key results you need to achieve? Again, we had 84% that said yes. Priorities are changing constantly because of changing business conditions. And when that happens, it's really important to redefine, realign around the key results you need to achieve. Remember the premise. Accountability begins by clearly defining the result. Without a clear result, people will always feel like accountability is being done in an unfair manner, that it's not being done consistently, and that it's happening to them rather than something they're doing to themselves. What we mean by accountability is that we sign up and take accountability, we align our attention, we invest in it with great ownership, and we go make something happen. Now, we decided to do some polls in these webinars. We found this is a real addition that our participants like, to allow you to benchmark with all the other folks who are on the webinar. So if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, we're going to post poll number 1. It'll show up on the polling panel on the right-hand side. It should just show up automatically. We're going to ask you to answer these 4 questions. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do this. They're really simple. If you're sitting with a team, then just do a majority vote. So just read the question and say how many say true, how many say false, and then report the majority vote. Let's go to poll number 1, and let's go through the responses. Our organization has defined a set of just 3 or 4 key priority results we need to achieve, and these have been communicated to the entire organization. Only just a little over half of us said that that's true. We think that's absolutely key in terms of being able to move accountability forward the right way in organizations. Number 2, our performance management process effectively ties individual work objectives with these top few most important priorities of the organization. Only 1/3 of us said yes to that. The others of us are saying no, it's not working the way we need it to. That's what we're discovering, that the internal processes for aligning our important work around the most important things really aren't functioning for us and need to be addressed. And what we need is culture. You know, one way to do this is to create a performance management process that kind of forces people to do this, right? We structure it. Winston Churchill once said something like, first we shape our structures, then our structures shape us. And that's what the intention of performance management is. It's intended to shape how people think and what they focus on, how they prioritize. And yet that doesn't seem to be working. Well, the backup needs to be culture. And culture really should be the main driver in terms of within the culture, our culture is telling us, make sure we're aligned around the most important things. Our Culture Track webinar talks a lot about how you create a culture that does that. But in the absence of that, what I would say is that the ability for leaders to drive a focus around key results is absolutely critical. It can be done outside of the performance management context. Number 3, people on the front line should understand the top 3 or 4 results the organization most needs to achieve. 96% of us said, I agree, this is essential. Very few of us said that it's not. Why do we ask this question? Because we often don't think about the front line understanding the major results the organization needs to achieve. We break it down, we give them their tasks, but they often don't hear, here are the top 3 or 4 things we as an organization need you to understand. And the reason that we need them to understand it is because that is where we create the customer and brand experience is on the front line. Those folks have to be in the loop. And finally, let me go back to this number 4. The majority of people on the front line understand the top 3 or 4 results the organization most needs to achieve. So question 3 is should they? Question 4 is do they? And only about 1/3 of us are saying that that's true. So real opportunity to begin by clearly defining the results. Not really important, that's the way to do it. It's the right first step to getting it done. And when it comes to getting things done, the big idea here is that if you don't get accountability right, you probably won't get anything else right. And we're not getting accountability right in organizations today. Our workplace culture accountability study has clearly shown the data is in and it is compelling that we are missing it in the opportunity to create the right kind of accountability. Here's the kind of accountability we create in organizations today. It's actually defined in the dictionary this way. Accountability, subject to having to report, explain, or justify, being responsible or answerable. So you look at that and you go, okay, that looks like accountability to me, and you're right. That's what it looks like to have accountability in organizations today. But it's not empowering, it's not enabling. It's really weak. I mean, look at it. Subject to. It's happening to me. Accountability is something that happens to me. Why? Well, to report, explain, or justify, to tell my story about all the reasons why I wasn't able to get it done. Now, being responsible and answerable kind of fits in. But this drives the consequential side of accountability, which is not effective. There is a better way. And the better way we present is the keystone idea in our book, The Oz Principle, and it's contained in this chart that I'm going to show you. This model that I'm going to give you about accountability is a game changer. It's a life changer. People who've seen this before have told me that once they see it, they understand and comprehend accountability in an entirely different way. Here it is. It's called the steps to accountability. As you'll notice on the chart's divided in half by a line. Above the line are the steps to accountability, where we see it, own it, solve it, and do it. Those are the steps to taking greater personal ownership, aligning our attention, and making accountability happen. Below the line, on the bottom half of the chart, is what we call the blame game or the victim cycle. That's where we go when things get tough, not because we want to. It's just human nature to fall below the line when faced with difficult obstacles, to articulate why I can't make progress moving forward, and we identify all those things that are outside of our control that seem to be getting us down. The decision to get above the line, to move above that line and to see it, is a decision to say, despite those obstacles, despite the things that I can't control, despite the challenges that are in my way that don't seem to have immediate solutions, I'm going to move forward with what I can do, and I'm going to explore what I can do and really drive towards results. Now, effective people that are good at getting results in organizations live above the line. But we all have this propensity to fall below the line from time to time. It's not wrong, it's just human nature. And sometimes it can even be a little therapeutic when you go below the line. But here's what we mean. So when we talk about this context, this is our definition of accountability, the Oz Principle definition. Accountability is a personal choice to rise above your circumstances and demonstrate the ownership that you need to achieve key results. It's the ability to see it, own it, solve it, and do it despite the obstacles you face. When you get an organization or a team that's focused above the line, facing difficult challenges, they come up with solutions and ideas that you would never have thought of before, and you see breakthrough traction come to the organization and the ability to move forward and achieve results. So let me go through each of these one at a time and talk about what it means to operate above the line. Remember what we said, the first step is to see it. What does it mean to see it? Well, in our workplace accountability study, we've identified 4 characteristics. We call these accountability traits. These traits exist in organizations that are able to see it, organizations, teams, and individuals that are able to see it. What do? Well, first, they obtain the perspectives of others. They're open and candid in their communication. They ask for and offer feedback, and they hear the hard things to see the reality of the situation that they're in. The key question that they ask is, what is the reality I most need to acknowledge? That's what it means to see it. Real quick example. Working with it's a manufacturing organization that had an assembly line. And, of course, they were focused on getting product out. They were growing in the marketplace. In fact, they were growing really rapidly. And so keeping up with demand was a real challenge for them. Well, on the assembly line, they were moving product through, and they were moving a lot of product through. In fact, they were moving so much product through that their customer satisfaction on the quality of the product had dropped significantly. Well, Steve Johnson, the manufacturing VP of this organization, a very smart guy, was leaning into this, trying to figure out, okay, what do we do to solve the quality issue? He tried several initiatives, several things. None of them were working. He just couldn't figure out what is the problem with our ability to solve the quality issue. Customers keep complaining. We can't seem to get it solved. Well, so they decided to stop and get above the line. And the first step was to acknowledge the reality to ask the question was a reality we, in this case the team, most need to acknowledge. So they began doing some work and investigating what's really going on at the front line. Here's what they found out when they started asking people what was happening. What would happen is that when you're on the assembly line, if you had a product come through that was out of spec, meaning there were certain specifications that defined this is a quality product, if it's not in the spec, if it's out of the spec, it's not a quality product. And if they found something out of spec, they would flip the switch on a light, a yellow light on the line that would be bright and everyone would see it. And then a quality engineer would walk over and see what's going on. Well, what they said was every time they turned on the light and a quality engineer walked over and looked at what was happening, they would say, ship it. And after about 10 times of that happening, they stopped flipping on the light, they stopped questioning the specs, and they just went ahead and shipped it because the quality engineer would always say, ship it. Now, when you ask the quality engineer, why are you telling them to ship it each time? What they said was, well, the specs are wrong. It's actually okay and it's in spec now in most cases, and so we tell them to ship it. But the experience that they're having on the line is that they're shipping things that are out of quality, and so they're not looking for anything. Well, so Steve realized that he had a problem, and he needed to change the game. I mean, he needed to get people seeing this differently. What he identified was a gap. We call it an accountability gap. And that's the gap between what's actually occurring and what we want to occur. In this case, he needed to keep up with his demand. He wanted the product shipped, but he wanted quality products shipped, and he wasn't getting that. Now, an accountability gap is a gap in performance that directly affects an organization's ability to achieve a key result. So it's not just any gap. It's a gap related to a key result. In other words, we prioritize that. Because it's related to a key result, we prioritize and said that's an accountability gap, and it's one we need to close. Here's the thing. Organizations today often tend not to close accountability gaps. They just learn how to live with them. They learn how to do workarounds. They learn how to do things differently so that they're not actually affected by the gap itself, or they found ways to try to solve it. But they still have the problem. So in this case, Steve went to work on it, and he said, we got to solve this. And he used the same thinking I'm introducing here, what we call the SOSD Accountability Tool. Now, SOSD is an acronym for See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It. SOSD. So it's SOS, save me, help me close this gap. D, SOSD. So See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It. Sometimes people have a hard time getting all of those straight, the sequence right. So it's See It, then Own It, then Solve It, then Do It. Well, there's 4 questions that relate to each of these, and I'm presenting these to you here today. The first one that I presented to you is what is the reality that I, or if we're working as a team, we most need to acknowledge. In this case, the way Steve discovered this in his organization was through feedback. We teach this feedback model because it's so essential to your ability to see it, that first and most important step above the line. Well, so what did he do? The way we teach feedback is you ask the question, what feedback do you have for me? Not, do you have any feedback for me? Because that implies that someone could say no. You know there's feedback. What you're trying to do is discover it. You're trying to reveal it so that you can understand the reality that you're facing. So you ask, what feedback do you have for me? People are taught to respond with both appreciative and constructive feedback. No one wants to hear it all negative, and no one wants to be brown-nosed. And so it's really a balance between the two. And then you simply respond by saying thanks for the feedback. You don't have to evaluate it. You just receive it so that people know that you're open to having it. What happens here is when accountable people seek feedback, what automatically happens is that feedback creates more accountable people because they can be more accountable because they're more able to see it. There's more that they can see of the picture because people are telling them what they need to know. Well, let's go to poll number 2 for a minute and just see how we're doing with that. Let's post poll number 2 on the right-hand side of the screen. There are 4 questions that we want you to ask and answer. And if you just read this question on the slide, when it comes to see it, how would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? And then it's obtaining the perspectives of others, being open and candid, asking for and offering feedback, hearing the hard things. And then there's your answer key. So you'll read the slide and then give your answer. Again, what we're really describing here is how well do team leaders have the ability to do these things that we're talking about that are so important to being able to see it. So team leaders in the organization, again, we'll post the responses here in just a minute. All right, let's go through this. Poll number 2, when it comes to see it, how would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following. Number one, obtaining perspectives of others. So interestingly, about a third of us say that's a clear strength. So 70% of the team leaders would not fall into the category of their ability to obtain the perspectives of others is a clear strength. Okay, now being open and candid, again we're at about a third, do that really well. Asking for and offering feedback, again a third, and finally hearing the hard things. So about 70% of the team leaders out there aren't really good, clearly good, at being able to do these things that allow us to really be successful. Now, it's interesting, too, if you were to do this assessment for yourself, where would you put yourself? How would you stand in terms of what you're seeing? So, interesting to note. Now, what we've also learned in organizations is that feedback will happen more naturally if it can happen easily, quickly, and in a way that's it's less confrontive. And so we've developed a tool, a feedback tool called Automated Feedback. It comes with the training. It's on PILtools.com. It's a digital feedback source, and it's a digital feedback tool that allows you to interact with people in a real easy and simple way digitally. It's interesting that we found that people are I don't know if you'll be surprised to hear this, maybe you won't agree, but our experience has been that people are more honest digitally than they are in person. There's just something safer about it. It's like getting behind the wheel in a car, The most interesting people become the strongest behind the wheel of a car. But in this case, the feedback flows more readily because it just is less intrusive. So something to consider as you go forward, thinking about how a tool like that could be useful to you. Let's go to the next step, above the line. Once you've been able to see it, you take the next step to own it. What do we mean by that? The workplace study revealed 4 accountability traits that are at the foundation of this. What we mean by being able to own it is to be personally invested in what you're doing, the ability to learn from both successes and failures, ensuring that your work is aligned with the key results. Not that someone's ensuring it for you, but that you own it. You're ensuring that your work is aligned with the key results, and then acting on the feedback you receive. The own it question is this simple. How am I contributing to the problem and or solution? Think about it for a minute. Do you really own it if you're not a part of the problem too? I mean, you've heard if you can't be part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. And that's really true. I mean, if you can't see your connection to what's going on, make a linkage between where you're at with what you've done, then you'll never be able to make a linkage between where you're going to be with what you're going to do. You've got to make that connection and see how you are connected to what's working and not working, and then be able to address it. Interestingly, everyone can play a role, and even the front line has to understand and feel a sense of ownership for the key results of the organization. We worked with one restaurant chain that was growing their organization, and we worked with the senior management team. They were kind of sitting in a U-shape in tables in one of our trainings that we do. And we asked the question we always ask, what's the key result you need to achieve? They said it was profit margin. We asked the next question we always ask, which is, well, what's the number? And it was interesting to hear the response. Someone on one side of the room, this is the senior management team, said it was 3%. Some on the other side of the room said, we've talked about 5%, and someone in the back started laughing and said, yeah, we've also said it was 7%. And so they all started cracking up. They thought that was pretty funny. So did we. We hear it all the time. We turned to the CEO thinking that she could solve the problem for us, and we asked her, so what's the number? And being a fairly creative and tuned-in person, brilliant CEO, she said, well, the number is somewhere between 3 and 7%. And then she explained, 3% is the number we told corporate we would hit. 5% is the number we think we're really going to hit, and 7% is our stretch goal. Now, is it uncommon to have 3 sets of numbers? No. But it's also not clear. No one really knew where to put the stake in the ground and say, that's what we're going to do. So they made the decision, and they decided it would be 5% of the number they would hit. And they went on a campaign throughout the entire organization and every restaurant to make sure everyone on the front line understood what the enterprise result was that they needed to accomplish. In fact, they were so effective you could stop a busser from busting a table in a restaurant. In fact, you could stop them and ask this question, what's your job? Now, you would imagine that in most normal situations, if you asked the busser the question, what's your job, they would say something like, well, my job's to clean tables. Not here. Not in this organization. Not after they got clear on key results. When you stop the busser from busting a table and ask them, what's your job, they say, my job is to turn in a 5% profit margin. That's the number they ended up on, by the way. It's 5%. And here's how I do it. The more tables I clean per hour, the more people we seat. The more people we seat, the greater our contribution to corporate. The greater our contribution to corporate, the greater the profit margin. That's how I impact it. Powerful, dramatic. No new products, no new menu items, no new programs, just a new way of thinking about how my work connects with the key results and how I can own it. And because of that, this restaurant chain experienced 120% improvement. It's 200% improvement in profit margin over the next year and a half. Impressive, incredible results because people turned the light on. They flipped the switch. And the switch is, I'm going to take accountability to achieve that. I'm not just going to go through the motions. I'm not going to go just do my job. In fact, it's so common that doing the job and achieving the result are just two separate things. I can do my job, and the result's going to be what it's going to be. In fact, so many people don't even know what the result is, don't have updates on it, aren't clear about it, that all they can do is their job. And that's the problem. What the solution is to make sure that doing the job and achieving the result are the same thing, and that's how you tie the two together. So in our SOSD Accountability Tool that we introduced, and by the way, when we do our full-day training, we take the entire team and organization through each of these steps, working on real issues, real accountability gaps that they're trying to solve. So the question number 2 is the own it question. The question you need to ask yourself, either individually or as a team, how am I or we contributing to the problem and or solution? Let's move on to solve it. Oh, well, let's do this poll number 3. When it comes to own it, how would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? Again, I think about ownership, and what comes to mind for me, one of the best signs of ownership is personal inventiveness. Do people take it and make it theirs? Whatever it is, a report that they typically do, or their cubicle, or whatever it is, do they leave their fingerprints all over things to show that they've owned it, they've invested in it, they're making it theirs? I love to see that when I'm working with employees within an organization and see those telltale signs. All right, let's go through the results on poll number 3. When it comes to own it, how would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? 41, it's a clear strength that they're personally invested. Now that's markedly different than what we saw in See It. 37% learn from both their successes and failures. That's a strength of theirs. So that's a great number in terms of moving up. 27% say they ensure that their work is aligned with key results. So real opportunity there. And then the lowest number is acting on the feedback we receive. So clearly opportunities here in terms of how we drive a true sense of ownership within the organization. Let's move on to solve it, the third step above the line. Remember, the first one is what? See it. The second step is own it. The third step is to solve it. So what do we mean by solve it? The Workplace Accountability Study revealed these accountability traits are the foundation of what it looks like to solve it. Constantly asking, what else can I do? Collaborating across functional boundaries, creatively dealing with obstacles, and taking the necessary risks. The key question is the solve it question, what else can I do? And of course, if you're working as a team, it's what else can we do? What we're talking about is the ability to kind of move across boundaries and not get stuck. In organizations, it's so easy to get stuck and have things get lost and even fall through the cracks. This is a typical organization where people have responsibilities. They have a job that they need to accomplish and define. And to fill the cracks, we hire other people and we write job descriptions. We try to write it in a way that we tell everyone what to do. In fact, there's people who actually audit job descriptions to make sure that nothing's been missed, that everything's been handled, everyone knows what they should do. Now, that's important, and there's a role for that to play. But when we get into the tell me what to do kind of mindset, what happens is things can still fall through the cracks and important things can be missed. Better than that is to create a culture where we have the power of joint accountability, where people are taking accountability not just for their roles, their responsibilities, but for the results of the organization. And when we do that, we tie it together because everyone's got everyone's back. They're making sure that the right things are being done and that everything's being covered. I remember one time working in a nuclear power plant, and we asked the question, who's accountable for safety? There were 80 people in the room. One person raised their hand, and everyone else pointed to them and laughed and said, it's Jim, the safety manager. And Jim stood up and said, that ain't right. What's right is everyone in the room is accountable for safety. Well, that was the change that needed to happen in that organization. And it did. The time came when everyone rose their hand in response to that question. But that's really what we're talking about, is how do you create an environment where people take accountability for the results of the organization? It's the ability to ask the question, what else can I do to solve it and make things happen? So let's go ahead and answer poll number 4 if we could. We'll post it on the right-hand side of the screen regarding solve it. In our mind, when you get an entire organization, people on the front line, people in the middle, people at the top, consistently asking the question, what else can we do to close the gap and achieve this key result, it's powerful when you get everyone thinking about what else they can do. I can't tell you the number of stories in our books that are filled with amazing examples of things people think of when they really are working in a solve it mentality. Let's go over poll number 4 when it comes to solve it. How would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? 28% said that constantly asking what else can I do is a strength. 28% said collaborating across functional boundaries is a strength of team leaders. 30% said creative dealing with obstacles is a strength, and 22% said that taking the necessary risk is a strength. That may be the lowest polling question yet that we've seen. All right, let's go to the last and final step above the line, that's to do it. When we found in a workplace accountability study, the 4 traits revealed were doing the things I say I'll do. So when we say we're good at doing it, we follow through on the things we'll say we'll do. Staying above the line by not blaming others, tracking progress with proactive and transparent reporting, and then building an environment of trust. That question, what am I accountable to do by when, is the do it question, and it rounds out the SOSD Accountability Tool, which is first to see it, what is the reality I or we most need to acknowledge? Secondly, how am I or we contributing to the problem and or solution? Thirdly, what else can I or we do? And then fourth and finally, what am I or we accountable to do by when? It's the ability to execute on your plan and move forward and not get stuck below the line that's absolutely critical at this stage of the game. You know, we interviewed a jet fighter pilot. His name is Jim Harris. He was a Top Gun Navy instructor for about 3 years. He flew more sorties than anyone in the Navy at the time over Vietnam, for over 400, and was the one that they chose to pit against an Israeli ace when they came to compete at a Top Gun school. Well, Jim told us, he said, it was so interesting to hear him tell the stories, but he said the most dangerous thing you can do is land an aircraft carrier land a jet on an aircraft carrier at night. It's like in the military, at least in the Navy, not many things more dangerous than that. So he told us what happens is the jet comes in, it's going you want to be at about 150 miles an hour when you hit the deck of the aircraft carrier. And there's little wires, 4 or 5 little wires, one of which you try to hit with this hook you can see hanging on the back of the jet to stop the jet. But when you hit the deck, in case you don't get a hook, then you have to put it into full throttle so you can take off again and come around for another pass. Well, it's so important that they get this right. You can imagine that little strip. There's the boat's going up and down. It's got wind blowing across the deck. The jet's moving around through the air. There's no autopilot. They're coming in with everything moving, and they have to hit this target. I mean, it's a miracle when they land. It's really what he described as a controlled crash landing. Well, so it's so important to get this right so they don't crash into the other planes. He said his brother one time landed a jet, and he clipped the edge of 7 different planes that were sitting on the runway at the time ready to take off. I mean, we're talking about what? I mean, what would that be today? Several hundred millions of dollars of jet aircraft. And no one had gotten hurt, but imagine the life that could have been lost. So because it's so important, they score it. They make sure that what they say they're going to do, they do, and they score every landing. And in the Navy, everybody flies. I mean, if you're an admiral, you keep your flying hours up, you stay able to fly. And they give you 4 grades. An okay means that you did a good job. That was everything went just like it should. A fair is not so good as an okay. There's something maybe off. A bolter is you missed the catching the wire. And a no grade is you did so bad they're not going to give you a grade. Now, this slide shows one other grade. It's called an okay underline. That Jim said he got 2 of those in his entire time flying for the Navy. He's a Top Gun instructor, and he got 2 okay underlines. And he said that's kind of like when you land the jet without a flaw. You jump out, you run up and serve the captain coffee. You slap the back of everybody on the flight deck, and you get back in the jet and take off. That's an okay underline. That's how good that is. He says this happens so rarely. It's because it's so important. They not only grade every flight, but then they debrief every flight and give feedback around each flight. They talk about what went well, what needed to change, how they would improve it. What we're talking about here is transparency and reporting, real visibility to what we're doing so that people can coach one another and give feedback when it really matters. That's the kind of transparency that's needed. Let's go ahead and post poll number 5 on the right-hand side of the screen. And let's go ahead and give you a minute and a half to answer these questions on our ability to do it as I've described it. What we're really talking about is the ability to execute on this way of thinking. Now, it seems so simple. It's common sense, but it's not necessarily common practice. Being able to boil down, identify the accountability gap. Remember, that's a performance gap related to a key result. It has to be closed. We can't ignore them. We can't do workarounds. We've got to close them. And then being able to execute on the plan. So let's just go through the poll when it comes to do it. How would you rate how well team leaders in the organization as a whole do the following? 32% said doing the things I say I'll do. I might note 42% said it's a strength but not an advantage. Only a third are falling into the category of it being a strength. Staying above line by not blaming others. Looks like we're not doing as well there, 22%. Tracking progress with proactive, transparent reporting, only 21%. Again, I think that's our lowest score. And then building an environment of trust, 26%. I think you can see that the scores in the do it area seem to be reflecting the lowest scores that we've seen today on the webinar. So it's all about this tool. It's all about being able to stay above the line and focusing on things that we can do and not get trapped in the victim cycle or the blame game. And what we do in our training is we actually offer this tool. This is also digital, where we have the ability to apply what we're thinking here in terms of applying the SOSD Accountability Tool to a gap and seeing real and true progress. Now, the other thing I would mention, we do have certification on PILtools.com. If you want to become accountability training certified, you can do that either by getting the training and doing it. It's a third-party accreditation, so you can list it on your resume. It's a great skill builder, and when you can get third-party validation on our website to affirm that is indeed your name is listed on our website as being accountability trained by the Oz Principal Company Partners in Leadership. If you have an interest in that, you can qualify to do that while you're being trained in the Oz Principal Accountability Training, or you can go ahead and sign up for our e-learning and take the e-learning course and actually receive that certification. Now, at the end of the day, we've all heard that there are 3 kinds of people in the world. There are people who make it happen, people who watch it happen, and people who wondered what happened. We've learned there's a 4th kind of person, people who never knew anything happened. And that just isn't where we want to be. This is about creating a culture where people make it happen. I'm going to go ahead and post this last poll, poll number 6. We'll put it on the right-hand side of the screen. Once someone has decided to change, the biggest problem is what? We resist other people changing, or they don't follow through on the change. Which do you think it is? What we're talking about here is creating an environment, a culture, where people can take that step to think and act differently. And when we start operating above the line, it is different. Interesting, we say that 85% of us are saying the biggest problem is that people don't follow through on the change. But why don't they? We've discovered that one of the reasons we do is because when people are acting different than the culture, and perhaps the culture's has been embedded with cues that allow us to give us permission to go below the line. There's some accepted excuses that are they're part of the way we do things. And when people tend to not be accepting of these and moving counterculture, we tend to resist that change. Is that we need to be ready to embrace changing the way we think and act in the organization so that we drive performance where it needs to be, above the line. Being able to get people to be more creative, more inventive, more ingenious, getting people to ask more questions, to say more what they think. All these things will be counterculture. But it's the culture we need to create. It's a culture of accountability. This training will help you accomplish that. And of course, the book, everything we talked about today, except for those accountability traits, are in the book. The training has those traits in it and some work around it. So thank you for being on the webinar today. It's been great to have you and answer these questions. I think Jesse has a couple of closing instructions for us.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, everyone, for joining us on the webinar today. As you log out, you will be directed to our website where you can find additional information about our upcoming public workshops. These workshops go deeper into the concepts that were introduced in today's webinar. On our website, you'll also find our author podcast series, which is also available on iTunes. Just search for Roger Connors or Partners in Leadership. Our next few public workshops will be held in Los Angeles, California on January 26th and Austin, Texas on January 28th. You can view the full calendar on our website. Our next webinar will be held on Wednesday, February 10th. During this webinar, Roger will be discussing our culture track. For those of you interested in continuing education credits, today's webinar is approved through the HR Certification Institute and NASBA. You may find information regarding continuing education credits on our website under the Info tab found on our homepage. Again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's presentation.